Let it get us go ahead and get the timer going. Okay, we're recording now, so you can start.
I'm Sam Colding, born March 4th, 1929, in a little community called Picnic. That's out south of Plant City, about 15 miles southeast of Tampa, about 25 miles. Way back in the woods. I had an older sister that was born in 25. She was born at Baum, a little community close to Picnic, and then my oldest brother, was born at a little community called Tiger Head, which was about 4 miles north of Picnic and south of Plant City. Then I had a sister that was born in the same area that I was in 1930, and then a younger brother, Wade, that was born in 1935, in February the 14th. That was at Baum, a little community of Baum. But we moved all over, born during the Depression. There was not much to go around. I always figured that my birth caused the Depression, but we moved around to different places several times in the little houses. The one where I really remember living was, in the beginning, was an old sawmill house that was for the help, and they built it out of green lumber, and it was probably 18 feet wide and 25 feet long, and there was 5 kids that was in that. But the lumber all dried out, and the batten came off the outside, and the cracks were almost as wide as the boards in there. You could take a cat and slam him around your head and turn him loose, and 50% of the time he wouldn't hit the wall. But we were there until about 38, and moved into another house, a little better, but no, that was in 36 that we moved from that house. And then in 38, my dad bought the place that originally belonged to my great-grandfather and grandmother. They built the house, so we bought it, and he paid, there was 30 acres and a big house. He paid $300 for it. That was in 38. We were ranching, in the ranching, and also in the slaughter business. In the beginning, we just hung the cattle up under the trees and skinned them like that out in the open, fought the flies, and to handle it the best you could, hauled it down in a Model A with a trailer behind it, and then eventually built a house with screens around it, but there was still no running water. It was a hand pump that we used up until after the war, when things began to get a little more tight, and had to quit that kind of an operation. But we were in the cattle business, and the land began to sell in Hillsborough County, where we were leasing to put the cattle. So we moved down to Collier County in 1949. That was right at Miles City, right, just south of where I-75 crosses 29. Now, there was a couple of little houses there, the farming houses. They farmed all the prairies out there and everything prior to that. And as far as the cattle go, it was a mistake, because this is not cattle land here. It's not very, too much water, too much heat, too many insects, but we survived. And I went in the Army in 1951, January of 1951, and spent 2 years there. Did not go overseas, stayed in Fort Benning, Georgia most of the time. But after getting out, well, I wandered around for a while doing several things. Bought a service station. A partner and I bought a service station down at Ochapi. Run that for a while. Did a little tomato farming and worked to the sawmill, and then went to work at the Bank of Everglades in 1956. October of 1956, I went to work in the Bank of Everglades and stayed there until till March the 11th of '58, and I was hired by the tax assessor to go to work for him, knowing that he was quitting the office and I was going to run for it as he was retiring. So I worked there until 1960, was elected in May to that office, but would not take office until January. But Mr. McLeod, who was the tax assessor, died in office about the last of August, so I finished out his term, then started my term in January, and spent the next 30 years in that office, Everglades, and also moved to Naples. The courthouse moved to Naples in '62, and spent the rest of the time there. In 1961, I took a trip back up to Hillsborough County to go bird hunting with a cousin. And I showed up at the house and getting ready to go hunting. This was about Christmas time. And a little girl drove up, one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life. She was out hunting a Christmas tree, ready to go out and had to cut the tree, so I grabbed an axe and we headed for the forest, and that about tells the story. 6 months later we were married, and she moved into Naples, and then she started working for me, and she spent 30 years in the office working for me in the tax assessor's office. I don't think they allow that anymore, but that was what happened. We had 2 children, one son born in 1964, and a daughter in '68. The son, at the age of 10, was afflicted with cancer and died 4 years later. And her daughter, married, has 2 boys. One is now 18, and one, I guess he's 19, and one's 17, almost 17. But we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, if we make it till June the 16th of this year. We found the most joy in our life was adopting grandchildren. Together with the 2 of our daughters, we have 6 more, or let me count. We've got 8 more that we've adopted, and the family comes along with. They're just as real as the others there. But life here has been great. The people of Collier County was so good to me when they elected me, and then the treatment that I got after that. I think I run for office 8 times, and won each time, so they were gracious to me. I tell everybody I had no education. I started and finished in a school in a little village called Wimama, W-I-M-A-U-M-A, named for 3 girls, Willie, Maud, and Mary. But I tell everybody that I had no education, really didn't get much education. I had to go into politics to make a living. But that is about the story of my life up to the present. What happened, a lot of funny things happened in the meantime that some I can tell and some I can't, but it's been an interesting life.
You can cut it off now and get you. Okay, it's all yours.
Regressing, going back to my ancestors, my great-grandfather was born in Alachua County, out south of Gainesville in 1840. His father, James, moved from South Carolina into Georgia, married into Georgia, had several children there, but moved on into Alachua County, and when there was quite a exodus from Georgia coming into Florida about that time, and there were several more children born there. My great-grandfather was born there in 1840, served in the Civil War during the Civil War time, and after that he came on down to Turkey Creek out from between Tampa and Plant City, and married a lady by the name of Walden, and then my grandfather was born there in Turkey Creek in 1873. He married a Wood. Was my grandmother was a Wood, and she was born in 1878, and they raised or had several children. Some of them died from TB, but my grandfather, his brother, and several of the girls were still there. And eventually, my father was born in 96, my mother in 98. They were married and lived in Turkey Creek for a while, but then they moved down to the little community of, like I said, Tiger Head, Picnic, and then Baum. Received our mail on the Lithia route. My other grandfather, he was a Pringle. His mother was a Burnett and married one time, I can't remember the first marriage, but he died, and then she married an alderman and had one child by Hiram. Alderman was his name. And then after the war, my great-grandfather moved down from Mississippi. He was widowed and had 3 daughters, and he moved down and they married, and then had another group of children between them. So that, and then my mother was a Pringle, and her mother was a Jones. Her father was from Alabama. She married him. He died young, but she married again. His name was Seaborn Leonard Jones, but he was shot by an Indian delivering the mail, and shot, not killed at the time, but eventually died from the wounds. But my mother was born on what is known on the edge of Bullfrog Creek up south of, well, it was Piru, then Riverview, north of the river, but south of the river on the edge of the little Bullfrog Creek. And 1898, March the 11th of 1898, and Mom and Daddy were married on in 1924, May of 1924. They have pictures of them. They're not at the wedding, but a day or two later, standing up by a Model T. It looked like they both needed ironing. But kind of the country is where I came from. Was lived in the country, raised in the country. My, as I said, my childhood was during the Depression. Never remember being hungry. Always had something to eat. Eat a lot of grits and white bacon or fatback, whichever you want to call it, but always had plenty of, enough to eat, enough to love, but that was the good old days. I look back and some of the fondest days of my life, but I determined that the good old days is when your mother and father are making a living for you and you don't have to worry about anything. But we moved or had cattle during the early years. Back during the 30s, the cattle were just running wild. I'm not running wild. Each person had a mark and brand, and their cattle were running at leisure through the country. No fences anywhere. They could travel anywhere they wanted to. But the mark and brand separated the different herds, the different people. They would gather them up and mark and brand their cattle, each one individual mark and brand. My dad's mark and brand was, mark was an under square upper bit, and one ear swallow fork upper bit, and the other ear, and he branded with an 85. When our son got old enough, bought him a cow or two, and my dad gave him that mark and brand, that under square upper bit, swallow fork upper bit, and I still have his brand, the 85 brand out there, but we retired it after his death. But back during the 30s, there was an infestation of a fever tick moved into the state of Florida from out of Texas, probably shipping cattle from there to Florida. But the government set up a program of dipping all the cattle. And they built dipping vats and filled them with water and mixed arsenic in it. And ever so often they had to every cow or every animal had to be dipped. They even dipped the horses, dogs, and what come with it. But they dipped for several years. My dad took a job in 1935 with the state and worked for about 3 months there, made a lot of money. He was making $75 a month for him and his horse to ride the range and gather the cattle, be sure that they were dipped. And that lasted on until probably in 38, when they ended the eradication of the ticks. And there was spot checks placed where they dipped spot, but it really cured them, got rid of all the fever tick. Back during that time when the fever ticks was there and the cattle were open range in the winter time, it was hard pickings out there for cattle on that wiregrass unless you could get an early burn and feed them something. But I remember traveling to the dirt roads out through the country and in the winter time, and you never got out of the smell of a dead cow somewhere. But after the tick eradication, well, everything picked up, and shortly after that, probably in 1939, somewhere along the 40, they passed the no-fence law where you had to fence your cattle in, and probably one of the best things that was ever happened for the cattle industry. You could manage them and take care of them and a lot better, but it was nobody liked it. It was forced on you. A lot of people got out, and the old timers got out and cut fences when they started fencing up before the no fence law. Well, these people that had cattle out there didn't like it, and they would get out and cut the fences. This couple of men that didn't know, the one knew one of them later, but Albritton, was Tom Albritton and his brother Jasper were out cutting one night. Every time they would put the fence up, well, they'd go out and them and more people would go out and cut it between every post. And they were out this night, but the law had evidently gotten word that where they were going to be, and they got out and kind of had a shootout. Tom was killed, and Jasper crawled out of it through the high brush and got back home and raised. He was not married. Jasper was not married, but he took over and raised the family of Tom's family, and I remember them well. In fact, during my cow hunting years, traveling through the country, people would stop you and invite you in to spend the night if you would come along that time of day. And I spent several nights at their house where they would put your horse up and feed you supper and breakfast and send you on your way. It was kind of a way of honor where people did that, took in people. During that 30s, there was a lot of, we call them hobos, there was tramps, people that was hungry, couldn't find work, pass through the country, but everybody would take them in, feed them, give them a lunch to go on their way with. They would stop for work, and generally there was not much they could do. There was no work to be done, no money to pay them with, so they'd feed them a little and they'd go on down the road. But you had nobody breaking in your houses. There was no locks on the door. Everybody, you could trust everybody, even those people passing through. They never bothered anybody or anything. They just ate lunch, appreciated it, and went on about their business. But things began to change as the population grew and an influx of people. When we moved to Collier County, I believe the population about that time was that was in 49, 6,000 people in the county at that time. It was a pleasure to live here. You could wander anywhere you wanted to, crossed out through the woods. The landowners didn't care. You could go out and shoot a deer at night. Some cared, but you got by with it. If you needed some meat, you could go out and do that. But it was just a pleasure to be here because you were free to roam, to go, to build, to do what you want to. No restrictions on you. But as an influx of people started moving in, it became necessary to put restrictions, building codes. Sometimes I think they're very strenuous, but building codes to be sure that your neighbor is protected. But nobody worried about it back then. They didn't worry about how your house was built. If you got in trouble, they'd come to you anyhow. But nobody knows anybody. Nobody knows their neighbors here anymore. Everybody's from somewhere else, so you don't have the camaraderie that you had back then with the local people. You remember the things on the lighter side when we were, my brother and I, we were always trying to pull a joke on somebody. I guess our dad taught us that because he was kind of a prankster himself. But we lived there at Miles City. The railroad come right in front of the house, going south to Everglades, and then there was 29 across on the east side was this canal they dug to fill in to build a road and probably the railroad with. But there was a gentleman by the name of O'Berry had a pasture across the canal from us. One day we heard some 22 rifles shooting over there, and my brother and I walked over to see what was going on. And these two finely suited gentlemen was over there. They had parked their car down and walked about a mile north and crossed on a log, and then a mile back down to where there was what they called a slip. It was where they needed more dirt, and went out to the side and dug more dirt and made an extension of the canal out there. They were fishing, but they were coming back along and they were running late to get, they said they had a meeting they had to go to in Jerome, which is a little sawmill town down south of us. And they wanted to know if there's any way they could cross the canal without going all the way back to that log. We told them, yeah, just pull off your shoes, roll up your breeches leg, and you can come right across there, just straight across the canal. They had each had a 22 rifle, fishing tackle box, and their rod and reel. And they pulled off that first one pulled off he said, I'll do better than that, I'll pull off my breeches. So he pulled off, and the first one stepped off in the canal without feeling, and there was no bottom to it. And he floated out the other side. You can imagine what he looked like when he came out with all his clothes. And we told him that the other one, no, we said right there. Well, he did exactly the same thing. I think they were a little disturbed at us, and we wondered why they didn't whip us at the time, but found out later they were two Methodist preachers going down to hold a conference at the church in Jerome, and so we got by light with that one. But I became friends with the one preacher, and we were friends for years. But it was things like that we did, and was always pulling a joke here or there and doing things we should not have done. But we had good times, bad times there. It was either feast or famine. There was too much water or not enough. Building fence out there, we built several miles of fence during the winter of 49, 50. All through the summer of 50, it never rained. And we thought we had found a paradise. We built fence through the marshes, and the grass was ideal for the cattle. And we built fences and started buying cattle and putting in there. And I was in 51, it was still dry in 51, summer of 51. We really had very much rain, just enough to make it real good. I went into service in January of '51, and that fall in October there was a hurricane came through and dumped water back through some of the places where we built the fence. You could drive a boat over the top of the fence post, the water was so high. And you had to float the cattle out and get them out to higher land. We found that it was not all it was cracked up to be. But we survived. Then during this time, watch the place grow. Watch the log trains coming in and out. The train from Lee Tidewater Cypress, once a week, they came out with a train load of, I believe it was 40 cars every week that came out with 40 cars of logs and would go to Perry, Florida, where their sawmill was. And they did that up until, early 50s before they cut out and closed it down. But I did work for a sawmill out there, mechanicing for, out in the woods for their tractors mostly, but we cut the edges of the swamps and dragged the cypress out to the edge. I was working for C.J. Jones, so we cut it for Lee Tidewater Cypress and dragged it out to the edge of the swamp where they could either put it on their tram or truck it out to their shop. And that was about the last gasp of the cleaning up the odds and ends of these things. When built a road, they built a road, Jones did from 29 all through the Fakahatchee Strand out through Stumpy Strand. It's about where the 8 miles from this end of the from the tow booth out, where the second canal crosses, and then went southwest came out at Royal Palm Hammock, and the road was all the way through there, and all that, most of it was hauled back out down that road, out back to 29, some went out on 41 at a later time. But it was a pleasure to get out there and watch the things go, and nothing bothering you, and no traffic. You had no traffic. And also, even in the after Joyce and I were married in 1964, when our son was born, all of a sudden one Saturday afternoon she decided she would have a pain, called the doctor. He said, had to go to Fort Myers, not because it was not a hospital, but because that's where the attending doctor was. And he said, bring her on to the hospital now. So I jumped in the car and went up 41, which just was a 2-lane road through Bonita Springs. And I made it in record time, but probably didn't meet or pass a half a dozen cars on the way up. We would never gotten there today with it, but arrived there, and it was 2 hours later. He was born, just didn't make it in time. Things like that stick in your mind. But we adopted these, talked about the adopted grandchildren. In 1985, our daughter was babysitting and brought this baby here to our home with her. She was 3 months old, so we looked at her, and I asked Joe, I said, call that lady and see if we can't borrow that baby. So she talked to her at some length, didn't know her, but talked to her at some length, and so she said okay. So we borrowed her, and we took her in and played grandparents to her, and almost took her away from the family. But I used to take her to the office with me every day. Most every day I had her there with me somewhere. She's now 25 years old, working for Raymond James, but still her granddaughter. And she filled in when we were having kind of a rough time in life, and she was the thing that got us through most of it. But now she still appears every 2 weeks on the scene, and we were happy to have her, but through her, kind of, we got the rest of them also, and they're all a blessing to us. They've